Hello, this is Mike Swanson. I run the website wallstreetwindow.com, and about once a week I'll interview a special guest. And today I'm going to be speaking with David Skarica in a few moments, who runs the website addictedtoprofits.net. I haven't spoken of Dave in several weeks now because he lives in the Bahamas, and that hurricane has certainly disrupted the lives of people down there. So finally going to get his updated take on the financial markets and find out what is it like now in the aftermath of that hurricane that went through there about 9 days ago. Before we get to that, I want to tell you really quickly that for the past few years, I've been posting everything I do in these interviews up on YouTube exclusively. I got actually two YouTube channels. One are videos solely about the financial markets, and then a second YouTube channel where I talk about other topics of interest to me, particularly historical topics, and those are interviews of other people. And I'm going to use now the podcast networks for my interviews of other folks, this being the first one, and the interviews will be posted up on that second YouTube channel too. So this will be on that YouTube channel. But if you want to make sure you get all my interviews, subscribe to the podcast networks of your choices. You should be able to find this on iTunes within a few days. It's going to be on Spreaker and so forth. And this way, you know, there's some people that like to listen to the MP3 files as they're driving down the car. You can stick it on your phone. Different way to interact with the media. So I'm going to focus on different forms of media, make sure I can get in various formats that people want. So with all that said, let's go and talk with Dave.
Well, how you doing, Dave? It's been a while since we last talked, and people know that you live in Eleuthera in the Bahamas, and that hurricane came through. So what was that like?
Well, where I live, see, what people have to understand, the Bahamas is a little unique in that, you know, when you have these islands, some islands are just these one island countries like Bermuda or, you know, Jamaica. Jamaica's a little larger. And so they just see it like, oh, it hit the Bahamas, and they kind of assume it's everywhere. But the Bahamas is unique in that it's almost 500 miles from the north to the south. And it's this group of 700 islands. And I'd say about a dozen of the so islands have like populations in the hundreds or higher. And then a handful of the islands have populations, probably, I would say, 1, 2, 3, but 4 or 5 of them have populations of over about 10,000 people or more. So it's a little unique that way because you can have, like, for example, where I live, it's called Eleuthera, and the exact town is called Gregorytown. And Gregorytown's kind of famous in these hurricanes for it was one of the places that got wiped out by Hurricane Andrew in 1992, which until this last hurricane was the most powerful hurricane to hit the Bahamas. And people here have these crazy stories about it because it was a Cat 5. It was moving a lot faster than this one. But anyhow, but then like just Nassau, which is basically 50 miles to the east and probably about 20 miles to the south of here, Hurricane Andrew did, or sorry, 50 miles to the west and 20 miles to the south. Hurricane Andrew did very little there, you know. So that's the thing about these storms is really if it's just like if you're in the eye wall near the epicenter of the storm, that's really where you're in problems. Like Abaco, the island that got totally destroyed because the eye came over Marsh Harbor, the largest town in Abaco. That's only 100 miles north of here. But here we had about 50-mile-per-hour winds. We lost power for about a night. And it wasn't really that big of a deal. But in Abaco, of course, this is probably the worst hurricane to ever hit the Bahamas in terms of, the Bahamas actually has very high building codes in terms of the way the things have to be built and hurricane resistant. You know, I meet people from Florida here all the time, and they were like, yeah, the building code here is probably higher than it is in Florida. But the problem with this was when it's coming over from the east and the Atlantic like that, it's just bringing the ocean with it. It's like a tsunami. So you're bringing 20, 30-foot storm surge. Most of Abaco is like, 3 to 10 feet above sea level, so it all just flooded. One reason, by the way, I picked Eleuthera to live on is I live on top of a 100-foot hill. So in a storm like that, yeah, I definitely my house would be in trouble because of the winds, but I'll never get anything with storm surge. And the islands are made up of limestone, so it's not like you can't get those mudslides and the torrential rains like you get, say, in California. So so anyhow, that's part of the reason I picked Eleuthera, because that kind of storm surge in Eleuthera, yeah, some of the towns would be washed away. But what would happen is once you're going up that hill 20, 30, once you get 20, 30 feet high, the water would just basically stop running up, right? Because you're sorry, I don't know, something just happened. Give me a second. Sorry about that. I'm on my phone and I think my head hit something. But anyhow, anyhow, that's the real problem. With these kind of low-lying islands, and it was a direct hit. And see another thing too. We don't have a lot of shanty towns in the Bahamas, but that island Abaco, because it's boomed so much, there are a couple Haitian shanty towns there, and of course those are just like houses put together with like leftover materials, and they got totally flattened. And a lot of the people in there didn't leave for shelters and the whatnot. So usually when we have these bad hurricanes, like when Hurricane Andrew hit here, there's like only 2 or 3 fatalities. That's pretty normal. But this thing is going to be in the thousands because basically people's houses got flattened, and people are just died in the rubble or drowned in the storm surge. And what you got to understand, you hear thousands, and if you live in Florida, Florida's 20 million people. Well, that island only has 20,000 people. So if anywhere from 2,000 to 4,000 people died, that is like, it's 10 to 20% of the entire island. So it's like we were talking about. This is almost like the way 9/11 would have been to a lot of Americans, especially people living in New York. This is almost like that to here, because people have never really seen anything like that here. But like I said, usually even these bad storms hit, a couple people die, and that's it, right? So this is like enormous. So what I've been doing, and we'll put a link under it, is there's a foundation called Head Knowles, and it's a local foundation, and they kind of specialize in the storm relief. So obviously they're bringing supplies like food and clothes, but they're also probably will help people, find new housing, or maybe even contribute towards the rebuild. So if you go to their I'll give you the GoFundMe page. You go there and you can donate some money. And what I'm doing is I sell these lifetime subscriptions for about $1,000 to $1,500 a year. Sorry, for a lifetime. If you donate $1,000 to them and just show me the proof of the purchase, I'll give someone a lifetime subscription. Obviously, none of that money is going to me. It's going to the victims of the hurricane. And I guess if there is one lucky thing about this, is that unlike Hurricane Andrew, which just kept running into Miami, when this thing did turn north over Freeport, it didn't really hit the U.S. mainland, which means, of course, a lot more charities and a lot more resources from the U.S. can come and help the island. Because, if it just would have rammed into Florida, probably all that stuff would have been, used to rebuild, Palm Beach or something. So there's not much positive out of this, but if there is one thing, it is that, they can focus all their resources on just really by U.S. standards, what are too small kind of places. But here it's a big deal because not only I'm talking about Abaco, but Freeport also got hit. Freeport's the second largest island in terms of population. It's got about 50,000 people. It's actually called Grand Bahama. Freeport itself has about 30. You're talking then, say 70,000. Well, the country probably only has about 400,000 people. So really about 15% of the country, and probably about half of those, so about 7-8%, lost their homes. So that's like a huge deal and actually strained on the country. So I think the lucky thing is because the Chinese had made so many investments in the Bahamas the last 7-8 years. They built a new resort in Nassau. They pumped billions of dollars. I think the U.S. government is actually going to be more active and help the rebuild because they don't want the Chinese kind of in their backyard, right? So I think in a way that geopolitical setup is actually going to help the country because they're going to get a lot more American money than maybe they would have if that wasn't the case.
Well, I read a story this weekend online. It was one of the Punch, actually, which is a newspaper in Nassau, a tabloid, and it had an article saying that there's 5,000 people that are refugees basically from this hurricane that have been transferred uh, to Nassau, and the island Nassau is on has 250,000 people on it. So there's an additional 5,000 people on the island, and it's saying they're kind of like intense. And the big problem they're having now is that a lot of these families have children, and there's not enough schools or rooms or teachers for these kids. So they're going to end up transferring a number of them to other islands because for that reason. And it's just showing how this is a drain on on resources, and these people don't have jobs now, and they're trying to find jobs, and it's just they've lost everything. Have some of them ended up on your island yet?
Yeah, I think a couple of the churches here and charities here have like taken people in, but one problem which I think is a strategic weakness of the Bahamas is, like I said, having all these different islands. Okay, let's just look at Jamaica, right? When you go to Jamaica, obviously Kingston is the capital; it's big, but you have Montego Bay, you have Ocho Rios, you have Negril, you have all these larger kind of towns. They're also like tourist towns, and it's all over the island, right? The problem here I find is I just think the country has been everything's set up around Nassau economically and obviously population wise. And I think you need some diversity, because if you had, and they need to whatever, maybe it's agriculture, maybe it's some kind of trade zones, whatever it may be, they need to promote people moving out of Nassau for this reason. If something like this happened, it would be like you could move people more. Like Eleuthera, where I live, is only 8,000 people, so we could probably take a few hundred, and that's it, right? And like you said, there's probably 10,000 to 15,000 people displaced just in Abaco, right? Doesn't even include Freeport. So I think that's a major issue here, that because you've got 80, you basically got 60 to 65% of the country living in Nassau. And Nassau's small. If you look at an island, like the island geographically I live on, Eleuthera, is way bigger, size-wise. That becomes a big problem. So I don't know what the ultimate solution to that is going to be. But yeah, if you had 6 or 7 islands, say, that all had 15, 20,000 people, that would really help things, because when something like this happened, you could fit 500 here, 1,000 here, a couple thousand here, and it wouldn't just have to all go into Nassau. Because right now, I would say, you're talking about the strain. Yeah, the problem is there's really nowhere else for these people to go to. And then there's another big problem. I talked about those Haitian areas. A lot of those people there are undocumented, illegal immigrants, and just people used for cheap labor, maybe similar to a lot of the Central Americans that are in the United States. So first of all, that's why the death toll is going to be underestimated, because a lot of those people won't be they're not officially here, and no one really, and they don't have any documents. So really, that's called the Mud, which was a big shanty town. That's going to just become a big mass grave now. So, and then also, like, they are going to go back to Nassau and the whatnot, and most of them are very unskilled, and they were just working for hotels or construction or whatever in this kind of boom that was happening in Abaco. So yeah, it is going to put a lot of strain on the resources of the country, which is probably why it's important that after this and it's going to take years for Abaco to come back, but that the rebuild starts at some point, because you're going to want people to go back there. And a lot of people probably won't want to go back there because of psychological, scars that were happening through living through that. But you do want a lot of people to go back there to kind of lessen the strain on the rest of the country. And, things in the Caribbean don't work like they do in North America. So I just don't know if the government's going to set up like a strategic plan to do what I just talked about, to try to repopulate. They call them out islands or family islands. Some of these other islands, like where I live in Eleuthera, if the population doubled here, we would be fine. We'd have basically 16,000 instead of 8,000. It wouldn't really put a strain on resources. There wouldn't be a lot of traffic still. And I think at some point they have to make things less Nassau specific, and that could also go by everyone who works for the government works in Nassau. Well, maybe a couple of the government ministries, you move the main ministry to Eleuthera, or you move it to Freeport, or you move it to Abaco, or you move it to whatever, Exuma. and then the workers, for that would have to move there as well. So I don't know. They definitely need to make the country less Nassau kind of specific. Because another problem with that too is, Mike, is what happens if I was looking. I'm a kind of a historian when it comes to these hurricanes. If you look in the 20s and 30s, Nassau had a couple direct hits. They got hit by Hurricane Matthew a few years ago, first direct hit in 80 years. But some of these were like Cat 4s and Cat 5s. I think in 1926, there was a hurricane that basically went right over Nassau, almost a Cat 5. Well, what happens if that happens? Then the whole country is basically screwed. Like the capital will be destroyed, and it will take forever to rebuild. So anyhow, I just think that strategically they have to do these things. But the most important thing now is, again, like I said, if you give to this charity to help these people, kind of like, basically, it's just think you've lost everything. It's not just like, my power went out for a week. I've lived through a couple of hurricanes, Irene and Sandy, and your power goes out for a week. It's not the greatest, but whatever, right? Maybe you got to eat some canned food for a little bit. You don't have a shower for a few days. But this is just like everything got wiped out. Like if your house gets flattened, things y'all take for granted, like going to the fridge and taking food out or watching TV, those things are all gone. It's like everything's gone. You don't have a bed. So anyhow, if you could, we could do that, and then if you want, we can move on to.
Sure. When I post this up on my website, I'll have a link to the GoFundMe thing, and I'll also, once the people do that, they email you at addictedtoprofits at hotmail.com. And I made a donation. I know you've made a donation. And one thing about investing in trading, it gives us the chance to make money, and it's there's nothing like it, and then that gives us the resources to do things like make a donation to this.
The restaurant here had a fundraiser, and I actually kind of like giving, even though, look, for you, the outsider, this is the way to do it. But what I liked about, I gave a bunch of money at that fundraiser, and the thing I liked about that is I met the guys. They're telling me about the exact people they're helping out. Like there's a friend of mine whose family was in Abaco, and they had to move back to Nassau. And I got all my old clothes together, a bunch of boxes, and I gave him a couple of the boxes, to send over to his family. So, obviously being on the ground here, I can kind of do that. And I, in a way, almost prefer doing that because you actually know where it's going, who you're helping. Yeah, you see the people that are affected. But obviously, if someone in the States or Canada or whatever, or Europe, it's much easier just to give the money, this way as well, right? And this was just really, that quote unquote perfect storm. Like, what people have to understand is the last thing with the hurricanes is, when the hurricanes go north-south through the Bahamas, they a lot of times don't get that powerful because the Bahamas, everyone thinks, the water's warm there, they're going to get strong. No, the water's shallow too, so they can't pick up strength because a lot of the water is only 5-10 feet deep. But when they come over the Atlantic and make that turn, that's what Andrew did too, and there's no wind shear, it's a disaster because that Atlantic, and I live on a surfing beach, so that, you go 100, 200 feet out, that water is 100, 200 feet deep. So it's warm and it's deep. So that's usually a bad disaster when they make that turn kind of from the Atlantic rather than just say coming up through the Caribbean.
Well, it's been, this is kind of, it happened, and it's gotten your attention, and it's been a big event. So we haven't been able to talk about the market so much for the past couple of weeks. So what do you think of, what's been happening since you've been gone, and what are you looking to make money in now?
Well, of course, we have this very interesting situation with the Saudi Arabia bombing, and obviously that's going to put a little probably floor under oil for a while. But in terms of the market in August, right before this happened, I really, I'm someone who's tried to short the market in the past. Big declines are coming, and you would think that me, I'm a perma bear, but I actually turned less bearish on the market in August, and it was the simple, it was for the simple reason that when the market was selling off, everyone became bearish. And I had people writing me saying, no, this is going to be a fall crash, the trade things, blah, 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 the way the market's trading, the internals, things like the Russell 2000 at the time. and the Dow transports were lagging. And I was just like, you know what? If I got this many people telling me there's going to be a crash in September, October, there probably isn't going to be one, right? So I don't say I became bullish, but I was just like not bearish. I was just like, just don't think a big move is going to happen. My feeling is what was going to happen, what did happen. The ECB came out very dovish, doing more QE, cutting rates by a tiny bit. The Fed is probably going to cut rates this week. I think that some kind of trade deal will happen, like an extension. Something is going to happen, and then the Fed will probably cut maybe one time now, and then maybe once again. So just thought things were going to happen to kind of prevent that from happening. I think when you're more likely to see a big market decline is when all those fears are gone. Like let's say the yields back up on the bonds because the market has gone up. Well, then you're not inverted on the yield curve anymore. And then let's say the Fed cuts a couple of times. So they're more dovish. So people are bullish like that. And like I said, let's say there's some kind of short-term deal with China. So again, people become less bearish because of that, right? So I think if those things actually get out of the way, and that's kind of what happened in '98 after they cut rates, during the Russia crisis, and you get a surge or whatever, even the market just kind of floats around near the highs here. That is more likely when something is going to happen to the downside. And obviously, I still think gold, it's pulled back here. Might continue to pull back for a little while, like the next few weeks or month or two. But I think, any dip, you got to use the buying opportunity. This was definitely a big breakout in the price of gold. When we went about 1,400 and came out of that big base.
Well, I actually am buying a new one myself this week that you're involved in too. It's a small cap mining stock. I bought or sent the money in the paperwork for the private placement in it.
Yeah. So I got a little deal right now called Goldcliff. It's an exploration company in Nevada. They're doing a 10-cent placement with a half a warrant at 20. Did for a few years, and so they're raising $1 million now because gold has done well. These things are now becoming, like, I don't want to say hot, but they're becoming in demand. So if you're interested in Goldcliff, again, what we'll do is we'll post both the forms and the company presentation below this podcast. We've got a good management team. One of their CEO is a guy that used to be on the board of Silvercrest, and Silvercrest is a big producer. It's like a $7 stock in Canada. And he owns 40% of the company, which makes the shares outstanding very tightly held, right? So if you're interested in that, like I said, you're going to put this out, I assume Monday as we're doing it, maybe later in the day. This thing I think will close very shortly, like definitely this week and maybe by Wednesday or Thursday. So definitely try, if you're interested, get back to me ASAP. And then get me in the forms, and I'll get you connected with the right person to send the money and the whatnot if you can do that.
Yeah, and again, the way to get in touch with you is addicted to profits at hotmail.com. Thing about gold and silver, it's been pulling back since a week ago. It's up today, of course, but the GDX is probably down about 10%. These triple ETFs are down even more than that. They just get crashed. They just crash when there's any dip at all. They're terrible. But the interesting thing is most of these small caps that we both follow aren't even down at all. The one I've mentioned a lot is Aftermath Silver, and it actually made a new high, I think Thursday or Friday last week. So this is something kind of interesting where the small caps, aren't really declining during this recent drop. What do you think is behind that?
What you mean, the small caps like acting better in the market?
Yeah,
itself?
acting better. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I just think that the small caps are dead for a long time, and they were just so undervalued in the gold and silver arena, right? Like one thing that our friend Mike Williams, who runs Aftermath, one of the deals we've done recently, said in an interview I did with him was in 2008, 2009 happened so fast, and then the bounce back was so quick, back to 1,000 in gold, that these companies didn't really get a chance to go undervalued. The way these things get undervalued is like the late 90s, the last 4 or 5 years, where people just lose total interest in them. They tax law sell them out. They have to finance and dilute just to stay alive. And then all of a sudden, you've got these little companies that may have tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars of metal in the ground, trading at, only like, 7 figures in valuation, in the single digits of millions. And then they have to kind of, it's like George Soros calls reflexivity. They have to kind of reflex to then, to go back to kind of fair value. And I think they only do that, though, when the gold price becomes somewhat economic for new exploration projects. And I think that 1400 to 1450 area was kind of that area. So now I think they're seeing something. Again, let's go back to Aftermath, which we own. When we first started buying this, you were talking, this thing had like a $3 million market cap. And, now it's gone to, with the new stock that's come outstanding because of the financings, it's gone out to like 15. And probably the asset they have worth in the ground, probably worth 20. Oh, sorry about this again. Sorry. Again, I'm on my phone and just what's happened is my cheek is hitting an app. So anyhow, So the Aftermath, I think that's kind of what's going on. A lot of these juniors, are just exploration. Maybe they're not worth very much, but also a lot of these junior mining companies do have ounces in the ground or are near-term production. And we also I'll recommend another one recently called African Gold. And then there's other companies out there. There's another one I like called Eurosun. And these companies are near production. So as they go near production, they're going to go from having tens of millions in valuation to hundreds of millions. And I think that higher gold price, which makes those properties more profitable, helps make those small caps. And at some point, you won't even care about the GDX and HUI, even the gold price itself. Once you get over, say, 1800, these juniors will just have a life of their own and be able to go up. It doesn't matter if, say, gold pulls back from 18 to 1700. At that point, those gold prices will be high enough to essentially basically make the sector very enticing.
Yeah, and we both think it's just beginning, really. Well, I know we've got to go in a little bit, so if there's anything else you want to add before you take off.
Yeah. I am. That's all I got to say. Yeah, you do that. The thing we talked about, the hurricane, for the survivors, and then and then obviously, if you're interested in this financing, also do that as well. And like I said, with the market, I like to be a little more exciting now, but I think we're kind of in this holding pattern, and I think too, if the market holds up the next 5 weeks or so into the end of October, then you could see a year-end rally because people are going to start chasing the returns because it's up so much year to date. That often happened in like 2014, 2016, 2017, etc. So I like to be a little more exciting, but obviously, I still have shorts, I still have some hedges, but I think really we're probably in the all clear if we get through the next 4 to 5 weeks, and then maybe something more to the downside next year. But I definitely think if they try to juice things, cut rates, loosen policy, that will help the gold stocks, even if the market does not fall.
Yeah, I agree with that. Well, thanks for taking the time to talk to me and everyone else. And everyone, you go to the blog post for those links and check out Dave's site too at addictedtoprofits.net.
Okay, thanks.